everyone, my name is Eve Sapp and I am one of the organizers of ICE 2022. And I just wanted to say welcome to all of you who are here for this session. I personally am really looking forward to this session. I find accessibility really interesting and really necessary. So I'm pleased to go ahead and hand it over to Ruhan and the team over at Ruxus to tell us more about accessibility considerations for visually impaired students in PeopleSoft. Ruhan, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Eve. Hi, everyone, and yeah, thanks for attending. We're also looking forward to the presenting and sharing with you what we've been involved in this project. So this project is basically, as Eva said, some accessibility considerations for visually impaired students in PeopleSoft. And we were also very fortunate to be involved in this project. UCT made this a priority well, as we go through the presentation, I'll go into the details of that. And yes, it has been quite some journey. So I'm going to go to the next slide and then I'll quickly just talk about the team. I'm not sure what I did to deserve doing all the talking here, because I've got much more proficient colleagues next to me here who are actually experts at this point on JAWS and screen readers, etc. So, but they'll be weighing in and just supporting me on this. Okay, so unfortunately, the systems analyst from UCT who was involved in this project couldn't join us today, but Chietza. So she was involved and also helped during this project. And then furthermore is Andrew. He's going to also give some support here. Andrew also on the project, and then I'll be doing most of the talking until they also weigh in. Right, so let's go for this. I'm going to take off the video and let's make a start for this. Okay, so first of all, like I already said, this is a project that originated from the University of Cape Town. It originated out of the Disability Service Unit at UCT, and there was this very specific function in PeopleSoft that they were interested in to get some extra attention from an accessibility perspective. We'll get into the details of that in a moment. So just in general, at UCT, at UCT, PeopleSoft Campus Solutions is obviously used, and it's used throughout the entire student life cycle. So from applicants all the way through to students, it's used. And specifically within self-service, we went through a project early on. That's not really in the scope of what we're discussing here now, but we went through a project of taking a lot of the classic functionality over to Fluid. Now that's not, I don't want to say you have to go Fluid to make your system more accessible, but I have to say, and I'm happy for you to join in there, I think as everyone would know at this point, Fluid specifically lends itself towards being responsive. So, you're optimized for small form factor, optimized for large form factor. And in the process of doing so, it does take on a more simplistic, that's not really fair, but a more simpler, to the point sort of approach. And again, I'm not saying classic doesn't work with accessibility functions. We'll get into the details of that. But the fact that things are simpler, less controls, more to the point, really does help in this context in order to make things more accessible and kind of to the point. Right, so just a little bit more about UCT and the self-service. So yes, there are some custom, obviously there's going to be custom components, primarily delivered components, and primarily Fluid. There's two classic components that are still doing the rounds there, but it's mostly Fluid at this stage. And then the great thing about this lies in the fact that we didn't really have to reinvent the wheel. Yes, there's considerations, and we're going to share that with you, and we're going to share some tips and tricks that we learned on this journey. But the great thing is that PeopleSoft, that I'm sure all the attendees here are using, already makes provisioning for these accessibility features. There are considerations, and we're going to share those with you. Right, then we're also going to talk just about screen readers quickly. Web context accessibility guidelines. That's actually something that the disability unit brought to our attention as we were working through this project. So yes, we're going to quickly share some details of that high level approach, and then we'll get into some demoing over here. All right, next slide. Let's see. Okay, so in terms of screen readers, probably anyone has been involved in any sort of accessibility for visually impaired student project, regardless of what system or platform you're using, would know JAWS. That is, I would say, that's the flagship go-to screen reader software specifically for this. So that's on the Windows side. Now, if you're a Mac user like we are, then there's something already built in called VoiceOver for Mac OS. But then again, let's not be unfair towards Windows. They also have their built-in screen reader software. But again, this is the feeling we got from UCT as well. JAWS is by far, that's kind of, I think that takes that's the flagship tool from a Windows perspective at this stage. So we primarily focused on those two areas. I'm glad we did. I think that's maybe tip number one. When you're doing this, don't just consider one or the other. You've got a mix of students using both these tools. And yes, the same functionality and accessibility considerations usually work between both of them, but we did find some in occasional cases where something, a little minor thing, works on the one but not on the other, and vice versa. So something worth considering. I mean, it's the same with any sort of development. You kind of think about different browsers, and there's always one little glitch in one browser. We all know that story. Same thing here. Different platforms, different considerations, but a lot of the same sort of effort. If it works primarily in JAWS, it will mostly work in the other as well, for example. Right, then this is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. This is early on in the project, and we'll go into a bit more details of the project. The disability unit made us aware of these guidelines specifically. So all this really is, and no, sorry, I'm talking that a bit down. This is actually a lot of guidelines, but these guidelines entail guidelines in general, not just in PeopleSoft, for you to follow when developing web-based type of applications, specifically giving you guidelines to help you align with what is necessary if you want to make your systems more accessible. Now, the good thing again about this is we can see if we drill into Oracle, and not specifically PeopleSoft in this case, but we'll get into that, we can see that Oracle definitely takes notice of this, and they consider these guidelines. I mean, sure, there's here and there's something that is worth tuning or worth improving a bit on, but that kind of brings me to my next point. We can really see that specifically in PeopleSoft, Oracle, and specifically PeopleSoft, is paying attention to this. Do yourself a favor and look at the last couple of PUM images that were released, and specifically go and have a look at the accessibility improvements that were made in those. We have first-hand experience of this now in the project, where we're migrating, or not migrating, upgrading from one version, and applying a next PUM update, and a lot of the fixes were just applied in the process there. That applies for tools upgrades, but also for specifically Campus Solutions PUM updates that kind of helped in this regard. So yeah, just in essence, these web content accessibility guidelines, those are guidelines that they probably mean less if you're busy using something that's delivered. They're probably going to just mean more when you're logging something with Oracle to say, but Oracle, look, there's guideline point 1.2.3, and they also know these guidelines. Trust us, we've logged a bunch of SRs. They know what we're talking about there. But specifically, when we're developing custom functionality, and that's what we're going to be focusing on towards the end here as well. That's something for us. I mean, the emphasis is on us, on the requirement is from our side to kind of be familiar with these guidelines. Right. So moving on, let's talk high-level approach for the project, and then we'll get into the details for all of this. So first of all, we knew nothing about JAWS, VoiceOver, and etc. Because this is sad but true. Most clients don't always pay that much attention to this. So obviously for us as consultants, we do what where the direction goes, and hats off to UCT for paying attention to this. So obviously JAWS, VoiceOver, that brings me to my second point. The best place to start here is to get familiar with these on your own. Forget about PeopleSoft, forget about a specific system or platform. Get yourself familiar with this, because trust us, there's a learning curve to this. You're going to see now as we work through this, things do take longer, but there's definitely a learning curve in all of this. But once you're in the flow of things, it does get easier. So yes. Then Also, the approach we took here, and maybe let's get to the point here. The specific functionality that the disability unit had in mind when all of this started coming to the surface was a project that we also worked on, but prior to this one, which was a piece of development for the Memorandum of Understanding for research students. So that really entails almost like a contract between the student and the supervisor and the student and the university in general, where specific details are being discussed and completed and then approved. So again, like I said, almost like a contract, a research type contract between the research students and the institution. And this was a big piece of focus, or a big part of focus of this project, to make sure that that is accessible. Now, you would already understand that's custom functionality. So, you know, obviously we had to make sure that our custom functionality did the trick. But the best place to actually start, once we kind of have a feel for the screen reader tools, was to actually start with delivered functionality, and specifically easy bits, so that we just get a feel for how all of this works as well. So I'm going to start there. I'm actually going to do a demo quickly of this delivered functionality, just a simple little action. And I'm sure after I've done that, for those of you who are not familiar with how this works, I'm sure you're going to really appreciate the, you know, the kind of the complexity that goes into this. But yeah, once you make a start for it, you kind of get the hang of it as well. Then I think the last point is really critical. And again, hats off to UCT for the people that they made available on this project. But get people involved that actually know this as well. We had this is a staff member from UCT, Michael. You know, okay, but we'll get this in, and yes. But Michael is actually a staff member from UCT, who we had lots of workshop sessions with them after we did all our own work, and after we've kind of validated on our end that all of this works to our satisfactory levels on the screen reader software. We had Michael actually take all of this for like a test drive. And it's amazing how much you actually learn just in those sessions as well. Things that we don't think of, that Michael, who is blind and, you know, is properly equipped and proficient in JAWS. I'm not sure about voiceover so much. I think JAWS was more his area. How he actually pointed out specific things. For example, and Andrew, you said this earlier on, where there's things that we were actually concerned of. We were nervous walking into the session about certain elements that he just basically flew over because of the way that he uses the system. So that is enlightening. That does help you quite a bit. And then obviously vice versa as well. You know, things that we thought was kind of obvious, he said, listen, pay attention to this. It's not that straightforward. Okay, but I'm going to stop talking for a bit now, and let's get into some demo mode here. Right, how are we looking on time? Okay, no, that's fine. Pacing myself here. This bit is specifically going to take long. So I think once we're through this, you know, then then I'll be a bit more relaxed as well from a timing perspective. Okay, so this should be more or less familiar to all of you, except for the UCT branding at the top, but good old PeopleSoft, a login screen from PeopleSoft. So I'm going to quickly, and I'm going to fly through this. Just do this in standard mode without the accessibility features switched on, so you kind of get a feel for what I'm going to do. And then we're going to take a step back. We're not going to cheat. We're not going to click around and do things. We're going to do this properly with the screen reader on, macOS voiceover in this case. Let me quickly get my test student here. Right, so I'm going to log in. So in the user ID field, I'm going to enter the details, the login details for the student. That's not right. Let me just check there. There we go. Okay, so I've got my home page. A lot of you that's already making good use of Fluid would recognize this. And immediately I can see a profile tile there with a little man that has a pencil next to it to update profile information. So I'm going to click on that. And in this case, I'm just going to go for contact details. I'm going to update my telephone number. So it's quite obvious from here, contact details. South African Cellular, going to change that number over there. And specifically take note of this, because this is going to jump out the moment we start getting into screen reader mode, or accessibility mode rather.